There is so much that we can learn from Jesus on how to respond to a crisis situation, such as the pandemic that we are presently going through. Let me just point out what I call the essential elements needed if we want to multiply our resources in times of scarcity. First of all, take note, Jesus does not agree with the solution of his disciples. Dismiss the crowds. It's another way of saying, there is nothing we can do for them. Let them look after themselves. It sounds a bit like what that senator said when she dismissed the appeal of the medical frontliners and said, "Oh, just do your job well." The people have to look after themselves. Otherwise, they'll go hungry. Here is how Jesus replies. No. Let us respond to the need. It is not right to just dismiss them. There is something that we can do for them. And to this, the disciples react again. They say something to this effect. Yeah, right. Do something for them, like buy 200 days' wages worth of food for all of them. They are being sarcastic, of course. It is their way of dismissing again the seeming impracticality of the suggestion of Jesus. In the version of St. Mark, their sarcasm is more obvious. They go immediately into calculating the cost. They do the mathematics, a bit like how many billions of pesos will we have to spend again on the Social Amelioration Program or SAP? Saan tayo kukuha ng ayuda? It is when we begin calculating the cost that we tend to be more inclined to dismiss the problem. Dismiss the problem rather than doing something about it. Like the disciples, you will tend to focus not on what we have, but on what we do not have or what we cannot do. Take note of what they said. We have nothing but 5 loaves and 2 fish. They dismissed again the 5 loaves and 2 fish. You see, Jesus cannot begin a miracle from nothing. He begins by identifying the resources available rather than surrendering immediately to helplessness over what we cannot do, over what we cannot provide. As far as Jesus was concerned, the 5 loaves and 2 fish were something. It is not right to call them nothing. They said, we have nothing except 5 loaves and 2 fish. No, that's a bad attitude. 5 loaves and 2 fish is not nothing. It is something. In the Gospel of John, John's version of the multiplication of the loaves, the 5 loaves and 2 fish, they come from a poor boy. And John even tells us that the bread was made from barley loaves, barley. You know, they don't make bread from barley in Israel. They would say, You've got to be so poor as to eat barley because barley is given only to horses. It is called the bread of the poor. But Jesus took it. His attitude is different. Can you imagine? The ones who are more quick at volunteering their resources are the poor. And so his attitude is different. Bring them over to me. It is his way of teaching his disciples never to underestimate what we have just because it does not seem enough. A dismissive attitude that cannot recognize the limited resources available will never experience the miracle of multiplication. And then, what does he do about it? Jesus does not say, "Oh, let them take a line. Let them line up under the heat of the sun," like they make people do when they give ayuda or distribute relief goods. You will have an idea in his next moves how Jesus values good organization. He's a very organized man too. He instructs the disciples not to make the people line up. He instructs them instead to make the people sit down on the grass. And in the version of St. Mark, Jesus would even do a group clustering. Let them sit down in clusters of 50 for a more efficient distribution. You know what happens when you make people line up. Sometimes some people cheat and they keep coming back to the line and they'll be scrambling and trying to get ahead of each other. Jesus makes them sit down. He organizes the distribution. And he does it in a way that would make the people feel important. He does not do what some benefactors do when they give candies to poor children. They throw them like that in the air and make the kids scramble with each other, pull and grab like hungry animals. You can also help the poor without having to strip them of their dignity as human beings. What Jesus does next is what I call transforming a situation of scarcity into an experience of abundance. It's not like a relief distribution. It is rather a banquet experience, an experience of the abundance of the kingdom of God. And the key words are very familiar because you will hear the same words when I take the bread at the Eucharist. He took the bread. He gave thanks. He broke it and he served it to them. What do we call that? The Eucharist, the secret of multiplication. This is how Jesus is mentoring his disciples about the miracle of multiplication of whatever little resources we have. We can never experience the miracle if we do not know how to take whatever little we have received, if we do not know how to recognize it as a blessing and to be thankful for it. Gratitude is one of the important elements of the miracle of multiplication. The opposite of gratitude is entitlement. People who demand things like they are entitled to them, will not be able to recognize grace. It is only the disposition of gratitude that prepares us for the breaking and the sharing. It is not grace if we keep it only to ourselves. You want to multiply grace? Learn to break it, to partake it, to share it to those who have none. And the more you break it, the more it multiplies. The story does not even end there yet. He asks his disciples to gather the fragments. And how many baskets were they able to gather of the fragments? 12 baskets. Very symbolic. The 12 symbolizes the church, the new Israel. He wants his disciples to see themselves in the scraps of leftover. It is what it means to be church, to be bread ready to be broken and shared. He invites us to see in the fragments the story of our lives and of our mission as his disciples. Remember, this began with the beheading of John the Baptist. Jesus heard that John the Baptist had been martyred. He was beheaded. And he wanted to grieve. But there was no time to grieve because so many people needed his attention. So instead of withdrawing into solitude, he served them generously. So he is inviting his disciples to be like John the Baptist, who had generously shared his life in martyrdom. And later on, to be like him, who also would generously share his life on the cross. Everything. He would offer himself as the broken bread of life, as a body broken for broken people. Brothers and sisters, we cannot call ourselves Christians if we do not allow Jesus Christ to mentor us in the secret of multiplication. Faith begins with the discovery of how generous our God is to us, and how He also teaches us to live our lives generously. Our generous God revealed the height of generosity in the self-giving of Jesus on the cross. And so let me end this reflection with that prayer written by Saint Ignatius of Loyola, entitled A Prayer for Generosity. Let it be our prayer for the rest of the day. Our response to the challenge that we are facing. Our medical frontliners are getting burned out. They are communicating their cry for help. They are getting sick themselves. We cannot behave like we do not care. We cannot just dismiss what they are asking of us. like our Master, perhaps we should adopt the attitude, let us do something, whatever it is, whatever 5 loaves and 2 fish we have, to be able to help out. In what way can we express this generosity? Let us say the prayer. It says, "Dearest Lord, teach me to be generous. Teach me to serve you as I should, to give and not to count the cost, to fight and not to heed the wounds, to toil and not to seek for rest, to labor and not ask for reward, save that of knowing that I do your most holy will."
Dearest Lord, teach me to be generous. Teach me to serve you as I should, to give and not to count the cost, to fight and not to heed the wounds, to toil and not to seek for rest, to labor and ask not for reward, save that of knowing that